Your Olympic hero has arrived. It's true, it's true.
You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another episode of BadAss Showdown, the series where I take two characters from different series and face them off against each other to determine who is the bigger badass. Once again, the criteria is not necessarily who would win in a fight, it's more or less who is more badass. However, who would win in a fight is always a factor. I've often said that I don't want to do spoilers with this series, but almost every single episode has had spoilers, and this is no exception, so there will be spoilers ahead involving these two characters. So today we'll be talking about Kakyoin from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and Rei from Fist of the North Star. So it's the best Dobro, not including Speedwagon, Speedwagon's on a whole other tier, versus the best Kenshi Bro, that's a term I coined myself. Whether or not other people use it, I have no idea. Without further ado, let's jump into it. So to start off with, we have the case for Kakyoin. Kakyoin is the bigger badass because of his good heart. Kakyoin is a very kind-hearted individual and easily the most compassionate of the Stardust Crusaders, with maybe a close call being Polnareff. Kakyoin is very calm, very caring, and a very loyal friend. He's also pretty strong. I think he probably could theoretically beat Rei in a fight, because he could just use the Emerald Splash on him, and no one can just deflect the Emerald Splash. But also due to the fact that Rei wouldn't be able to see Hierophant Green, because Rei's not a stand user. And that said, it's not exactly a sure thing, and I'll get into that a little bit more when I talk about Rei. Kakyoin's also got a lot of charisma in a lot of weird ways. There's that weird little quirky cherry thing that he does, and, you know, although the most famous instance of it is fake Kakyoin, real Kakyoin apparently does it too. Kakyoin was also instrumental in defeating Dio, because if it wasn't for Kakyoin discovering how the world worked and relaying that message, albeit in his final moments, then the Stardust Crusaders probably wouldn't have been able to defeat Dio. Kakyoin is also really good with the older ladies. It's funny, because, like, I saw this video that this guy did of having his mom watch JoJo intros, and she saw Kakyoin, and she kept talking about how charming he was, and I'm like, that's kind of funny, because, you know, Kakyoin in the meme world is known as the MILF Hunter, because of, like, one line of dialogue he says about Holly Kujo. But anyway, point is, Kakyoin is good with the older ladies. And I think that him and Jotaro have a lot of good chemistry as friends, because they kind of balance each other out, because their demeanor is almost polar opposite. Like, they're both very level-headed, but their demeanor is almost opposite. Whereas Kakyoin is very kind-hearted, Jotaro is very distant and angry. Not to mention Kakyoin has a great theme song, so that's definitely a plus. Not to mention his backstory is very well done, and his death is sad. I wouldn't say it's the saddest death in JoJo, I'd still say that goes to Caesar, but Kakyoin is definitely a close second as far as that. And like I said, with the exception of Speedwagon, I do think Kakyoin is the best Jobro. Alright, but yeah, that's the case for Kakyoin. Let's talk about the case for Rei. So Rei is the bigger badass because he's more muscular. He's got the South Star Waterfowl Fist, which I think is the way he could theoretically defeat Kakyoin. If he's fast enough, he could do it, because with that South Star Sacred Fist, he basically would just slice him apart with his fingers. That said, once again, if Kakyoin used the Emerald Splash, you know, he wouldn't be able to deflect that. No one can just deflect that. But all jokes aside, he wouldn't be able to see Hierophant Green, so theoretically Kakyoin could still beat him. But Rei could theoretically beat him as well. It's pretty much anyone's game at that point. The other thing about Rei that makes him the bigger badass is his death is legitimately sadder. Whereas I said Kakyoin is the second saddest death in JoJo, Rei is easily the saddest death in Fist of the North Star. There's nothing that even comes close. Not to mention another thing that makes Rei more badass is his revenge story with his sister. That definitely gives him a plus on that. With seeking revenge on his sister from Jagi, and that whole quest for vengeance was really cool. Not to mention his romance with Mamiya was really good and very sad, especially in the part where he died. And he went out like a man. You know, despite the fact that he had this crippling, you know, slow death that Rao put on him, he still went out and was able to defeat Yuta. And in addition to that, you know, he took his death like a man. Now, granted, he threw Mamiya out of there and told him he didn't want her to see him suffer like that and go out like that. And I would say Rei is also just, in general, much more manly than Kakyoin. You could argue that's because Kakyoin is a high school student, whereas Rei is an adult, which definitely could be a factor in that. Not to mention the fact that Rei's had to live in a post-apocalyptic world, which has just made him arguably tougher because, you know, Kakyoin has lived in a normal world, just one with stands, and didn't really have any conflict until Dio showed up. And, much like Kakyoin, Rei has very good chemistry with Kenshiro. They work really well together. Like I said, as far as Kenshi bros go, no one has ever come close. I would say my second favorite is Toki. If you count him, Toki's definitely the close second. In addition to that, Rei is just more ruthless. He cuts down goons like nothing. He cuts through them like butter and doesn't look back on it. But yeah, that's the case for Rei. Alright, so now we're gonna go ahead and come to the verdict. So, Who's the bigger badass? Well, in my opinion, again, this is a very tough one, as they usually are. Rey is the bigger badass. And the reasoning for that is, number one, Rey's death was like a turning point in the series. It's definitely where Fist of the North Star definitely took a turn to get even better than it was. And everything leading up to that, his entire character arc was just fantastic. All the stuff with his sister Irie and Joggy and all that. The fact that he's still able to take on Yuta after he's been dealt a lethal blow by Rao that's slowly killing him. The fact that he even stood up to Rao to fight him in the first place, knowing full well he probably didn't stand a chance, is pretty fucking badass. And again, with the way he just slices through enemies like butter, that doesn't get much more badass than that. So yeah, in the case of Kakyoin versus Rey, Rey is the bigger badass. I'm Fugitive Red Eye, and see you next time.